Welcome you all to my class on sons and lovers. This is the second class, dear students, and in the first class I gave you some ideas about the text and about modern novels, basically, about the characteristics of modern novels. And I said that there must be some psychoanalytic study of the human mind. And even in modern novels, we see the impact of colonialism and the relationship among human beings in a colonial, phenomenon. And what we see in Passage to India, in Heart of Darkness, we see the colonial atmosphere. The atmosphere in which the colonizers and the colonized people, how they develop their relationship, or what about the relationship between the colonized people and the colonizers. And at the same time, I said psychological issues are very important, and moreover, you will have some, uh, existentialist and absurdist ideas as well, if not in this novel, but in other modern novels and postmodern novels as well. So these characteristics you can remember for better understanding of the text. Now, some few more characteristics regarding this particular novel I want to share with you at the beginning of today's class. That as we will progress reading this novel, we will notice other things, we will observe other things, like there will be some reflection of autobiographical elements of, D.H. Lawrence in this novel. There are many critics who prefer to say that D.H. Lawrence's autobiographical or biographical elements surfaced in this novel frequently and dominantly. So we will try to unfold that. Though there are different types of criticism available. There is Marxist criticism, there is postmodern modernism, there is neo criticism, there is feminism, there is structuralism, post-structuralism, formalism. There are different types of areas of criticism, and to explore a book from different point of views. Now, neo-criticism suggests that we should not read a text in terms of a biography or autobiography of a writer. But still, since we are learners of literature, we will try to we will try to apply different types of criticism for a particular text. And that is why we will also count the importance of autobiographical elements in this novel. Whether the biographical elements of D.H. Lawrence are present in this novel or not, we will gradually unfold that. We will also gradually unfold another theory which is known as Oedipus complex. Mother fixation in a person, in a man, in a boy. That how much mother fixation may work in a person's mind, that how he dwindles between his relationship with his lovers and with his mother, that how his relationship, how a person's relationship with his mother has an impact on his relationship with his lover. So, or his relationship with his lover, does it leave any impact on his relationship with his mother? So it's a very complex wave of relationship, and this is universal. A male boy or a person who basically dwindles, he wavers between two relationships. This is universal. His relationship with his wife or lover, and his relationship with his mother. So this complex wave of relationship will also be unfolded as we will gradually progress in this novel. We will also notice another thing which is important for us to understand in this particular text, that which kind of love is essential for the survival of human beings, or essential for the existence of human beings. Is it physical love, or is it spiritual love, or is it the combination of both types of love? Both physical and spiritual love. So we will also notice that which kind of love dominates finally in this novel. And when we will deal with this novel, naturally, since it's an issue of spiritual and physical love, and that is why we will bring into comparison texts like Tagore's, Shesher Kobita, or the ideas and philosophical ideas and the concept of John Donne regarding love, the, the does it or is it necessary that a body should always be there to pass, I mean, or to transfer the essence of love from one person to another. So what is the significance of the body? So what is the significance of the soul? So is it soul alone that can nourish love? Is it body alone that can sustain love? So there are different critical issues over here. And what about the influence? What about the impact of, the relationship between mother and father on the children? We will notice in this novel that the relationship between the husband and the wife, I mean Mr. and Mrs. Morel, leaves an impact on the psychological state of mind of the children, and how the deprivation of basically, psychological isolation of a man, of a woman, basically in this novel, leads her to her inclination towards the children, giving up or discarding her relationship with the husband. So as we will read the novel, as we will progress in the novel, we will notice one more thing, that Gertrude Morel, or Mrs. Morel, she gradually withdraws herself from her husband. She gradually, her relationship with Mr. Morel, reduces or diminishes, and she develops her closeness with her children. And that is the shelter she finally thinks where she can, settle herself psychologically. Now, in the previous class, I said that Mr. Morel was a miner. He was working in a mine, and they have recently, I mean, Mr. and Mrs. Morel have recently changed their dwelling place or residence. And already we see that there are two children. William is the eldest son or eldest child, and Annie is the second child. And Mrs. Morel was expecting another child. And that's what, and we also came to know that the relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Morel, almost from the very beginning of their marriage, was not a good one. It was not a healthy one. And we were in the middle of the first chapter, and up to the middle of the first chapter, we understood, we realized that the relationship was vulnerable between Mr. Morel and Mrs. Morel. The next part of the flashback describes the meeting between Gertrude Coppard and Walter Morel. But Gertrude Coppard is basically the name of Mrs. Morel. So remember this name, Gertrude Coppard. And Gertrude, this name is also familiar because Gertrude was, the mother of Hamlet in Shakespeare's play Hamlet. So Gertrude Coppard and Walter Morel, they met first before their marriage at a Christmas party. I mean, we are going to the flashback that how they got introduced to each other. Mr. Morel and Mrs. Morel, I mean Gertrude Coppard and Walter Morel, they met at a Christmas party when she was 23 and he was 27. So that was the age when they met together. It seems the main attraction he holds for her is that he is different from her father. And at the party, he asks her to dance. She refuses, and he sits down and talks with her instead. The next Christmas, they marry, and their early married life seems very happy. So that is how they met together, and in a Christmas party. And in that party, Mr. Morel, requested her or approached her with the proposal of dancing, though she refused, but she did not refuse to have a conversation with Mr. Morel. So they had a conversation, and after that, in the next Christmas, they married. And according to the text, we come to understand that the beginning of their conjugal life was seemingly happy, though it didn't remain happy afterwards. And we come to know that even in the first chapter of the novel. However, after they have been married for 7 months, Gertrude finds the unpaid bills for the household furniture in her husband's coat pocket. So after 7 months of their marriage, Mrs. Morel finds in the pocket of her husband, I mean, the unpaid bills for the furniture that he bought for the marriage. And it was insulting for her. She confronts him to ask about the bills, and he brushes her off. So the next day she goes to see his mother. And when Mrs. Morel goes to her husband and asks him that what about the unpaid bills, that why did you keep these bills unpaid? Why didn't you pay these bills? So he became very angry. So finding no alternative way, Mrs. Morel, I mean Gertrude Copper, she went to meet her mother-in-law. She tells Gertrude that her husband still owes a good deal of money and that the house they live in belongs to her. And not only that, the mother says that Mr. Morel has a huge loan and he owes a good deal of money to other people. And basically, the house where they reside is not her husband's house, it is the house of, I mean, Gertrude Morel's mother in law. This information changes the way Gertrude feels towards her husband. So, this information, I mean, that her husband has got some loans, that this building or this house is not the property of her husband, it basically makes Gertrude psychologically very vulnerable, and she feels insulted, and she feels helpless, and she comes to her husband, and her attitude towards her husband gradually starts changing. She becomes colder and more condescending toward him. She begins to feel isolated from her husband, as I said earlier, that as she came to understand that her husband kept some secret from herself, that these are the secrets. She became isolated, and this causes her to turn toward her child instead. And as she became isolated, she was gradually becoming inclined to her children. And this basically happens in our real life situation as well. If you notice the relationship between a mother and father is not sound one, you will see that the mother always, leans towards her children. The mother always depends on her children, and gradually, as the children grow up, her dependence or her fascination or her inclination towards the children gains the upper hand than her relationship with the husband. So the relationship with the husband gradually evaporates, giving way to the relationship of the mother with the children. So that is also universal. It happens everywhere in the world. It's not simply an issue of the Western society. It's an issue that the mother gradually starts depending on the children instead of her husband is a universal issue. And the husband starts becoming isolated. Whether he is responsible for that or not is a different question. It is a debatable question. But that is the fate, or that is the ultimate result, or you know, destiny of a man. And this causes her to turn toward her child instead. A key incident happens when Morel cuts William's hair while Mrs. Morel is sleeping. This is one of the major factors in her estrangement from her husband, as the betrayal she feels when she discovers William's haircut remains with her throughout the coming years. Now, what happens that one day when Mrs. Morel was sleeping, Mr. Morel cuts the hair of William, and uh, the mother cannot tolerate it. Now, it's apparently it's a very silly issue that the father clips the hair of the child, and why should the mother be angry? Because one day the hair will grow up again, and you can again trim it, and you can again give it the shape that you choose. But basically, for a male child, if there is any wrong, if there is any problem in the haircut once, then it basically takes several cuts to give it the right shape. And Mrs. Morel becomes furious after she observes that her son's, I mean William's hair has been cut, and it's difficult to give it the right shape again. Now, apparently, as I said, this cutting of hair may not be significant, apparently, but inwardly, if you look deeper into the issue, you will notice one thing that the mother, I mean Mrs. Morel, has already started thinking that William is her property, that William is her son, and Mr. Morel doesn't have that much right over William as she possesses, because she has already started isolating herself psychologically from her husband. And that is why She is now fully dependent on William spiritually and psychologically, and that is the reason why she does not allow her husband, or cannot allow her husband, to take decision about the hair cutting of William. Apparently silly, but inwardly, as I said, that the mother thinks that cutting hair of the male child or the child is basically the sole property of the mother, and the father is not supposed to poke nose in such issues. And in real life situation, you will also notice that if ever it happened in your case, if you are a male child, I am talking about the students who are male, who are boys, if it ever happened in your life that your haircut was not good, your father didn't mind, but who basically became frustrated and became angry is your mother. But you never discovered it until today when I am explaining this probably. And what is the reason? The reason is that the mother thinks that the son basically belongs to her and not to the father. So this is a psychological issue. Why does it happen? I will gradually try to unfold the issues to you. Chapter 2, The Birth of Paul and Another Battle. Morel feels ashamed. We already know that Mrs. Morel was carrying, and she gave birth another child, the third child. And Morel feels ashamed for bullying his wife, and we already know that Mr. Morel sometimes, scolds Mrs. Morel, not only that, physically also assaults Mrs. Morel sometimes. And Morel now is feeling ashamed for bullying his wife. He also realizes the difficulties and begins to be somewhat more helpful, and he starts realizing that he is not behaving in a proper way, and he is expressing his sorry, or he says sorry to his wife, but it doesn't work basically. One morning Mrs. Morel summons her neighbor. So what happens that one morning Mrs. Morel summons her neighbor, Mrs. Kirk, by banging on the back of the fireplace with the poker. So there is a fireplace, since we know that it's a house of a miner, and with a poker she bangs and tells her to fetch Mrs. Bauer. And what does Mrs. Morel tell her neighbor Mrs. Kirk? She requests Mrs. Kirk to fetch Mrs. Bauer. Mrs. Bauer, who is Mrs. Bauer? The midwife or obstetrician in proper English. So, who is midwife in Bangla? I must tell you the word, otherwise you will not understand. Midwife is basically dhai ma, we say. And it was the tradition in the villages in Bangladesh even 10 to 15 years back. Though right now we know that all the mothers go to the hospitals probably. But even if they stay in the house, in most cases the doctors or the nurses come for the delivery. But the midwife was summoned. She gives birth to a boy and is very ill. And she gives birth to a boy, and Mrs. Morel becomes very ill after giving birth to the child. Her husband comes home and is told by Mrs. Bauer that he has a son. So when Mr. Morel, you must have observed one thing, that when Mrs. Morel gave birth to the child, Mr. Morel was not at home. He was absent. And when he returned, he was informed that he has a son. He asks her for a drink, and then, after he has had his dinner, goes up to see his wife and son. So what he does, that he comes home, he takes his dinner, and then goes to his wife and son. We are then introduced to Mr. Heaton, the congregational clergyman who comes to visit Mrs. Morel every day. So we also see the churchman, clergyman who comes to the house every day. One day Morel comes home while he is still visiting and begins to make a scene by enumerating the difficulties of working in the mine. So one day it so happened that the clergyman was still in the house of Mrs. Morel or Mr. Morel, and by this time Mr. Morel returns from the mine. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the clergyman or the churchman, he frequently visits the house of Mr. Morel and talks to Mrs. Morel, probably regarding religious issues. And one day it so happened that Mr. Morel returns before his scheduled time, and he meets that man, and they start a conversation. And what about the conversation? In that conversation, Mr. Morel wants to prove that his job in the mine is a very difficult one, and he wants to have a kind of sympathy from that person. Mrs. Morel feels disgusted by her husband's tendency to play for sympathy with those around him. And Mr. Morel has got this sympathy whenever he meets anyone. He tries to convince that person that working in the mine is very troublesome, it's very difficult. And that's how he wants to extract some sympathy from that person. So, this attitude or this characteristic of Mr. Morel is always discussed or disliked by his wife. I mean, Mrs. Morel, she never likes this attitude of her husband. One evening, after a quarrel with her husband, Mrs. Morel takes Annie and the baby and goes for a walk near the cricket field. So the quarrel, so the tough days go on. The quarrel between the husband and the wife becomes an everyday issue. And after one such incident, Mrs. Morel takes Annie and the baby, the baby she has just given birth, goes for a walk in the cricket field. She seems at peace, and when she goes to the cricket field and she has the two children with her, she finds peace over there and feels strongly for her baby son. And she was holding the baby son very tightly, and she was trying to feel the son, because she is already isolated from her husband psychologically, mentally. She has a sudden instinct to call him Paul, and what does she do? She wants to call that child Paul. You know, the closeness a child enjoys from its mother, this closeness he never gets from his father. It's the biological issue, it's the issue you cannot ignore, because a child, whether it's male child or a female child, the attachment she has for the first 2 years or 3 years with the mother is not possible from the father. So this is biological. So this is practical. This is realistic. You cannot detach a child from its mother. So the attachment between the mother and the child, is so solid that it definitely leaves an impact on the mind of the child. And according to D.H. Lawrence, if the child is male, it's a boy, then the attachment is stronger with the mother than the girl. So it's often said that a mother always loves her son, and a father always loves his daughter more. So one is known as Oedipus complex, and the other is known as Electra complex. This is a really complex issue, and we will gradually discuss. Let's proceed. The next major battle between the Morels begin when Walter comes home late and drunk again and accidentally pulls out a kitchen dryer in his haste to get something to eat. So again, another battle, starts after a few days. And what happens that Walter, he drinks. We already know that he goes to the bar frequently. And after returning from the bar, he goes to the kitchen and wants to have some food for eating, and accidentally he lets the kitchen dryer fall. When his wife tells him she will not wait on him, he becomes enraged and flings the dryer at her. And Mrs. Morel tells him that Mrs. Morel will no more wait for him for dinner. And being angry, Mr. Morel throws the dryer at her, and which strikes her on her forehead and cuts her forehead on the corner of the dryer. For the few days after this incident, Morel refuses to get out of bed. Um, when he finally gets up, he immediately goes to Palmerston, one of his favorite berths, and this is where he spends the next several nights. So what happens? That he himself becomes angry, and Morel, he does not go to the mine, and he stays in the house next few days. And after that, he straight goes to a public bar, and he spends the next few nights in the public bar. He stays over there, he drinks, and he spends according to his own sweet will. So naturally, you understand that this will not be allowed by any wife. That the husband and he's going to the bar, he's spending nights in the bar, and not coming back to the house, so it is not allowed by, or it should not be allowed by any wife. One night, however, he finds himself out of money. So what happens that when he was staying in the bar, he spends his money. He is out of his money, and therefore takes a sixpence from his wife's purse and comes home and takes some money from his wife's purse. So you can understand that he doesn't have any personality as well. She notices that it is missing and confronts him. So when Mrs. Morel discovers that she doesn't find those sixpences in her purse, she confronts her husband, and the husband he then goes upstairs and returns with a bundle and says he is leaving. The husband again pretends to be very angry, and he takes his dresses, I mean the pants, shirts, and other things, jackets, and makes a kind of bundle. It's the traditional way that a husband wants to leave the house and says, "Okay, I am going out of the house." But it probably never becomes successful, or hardly it becomes successful, because you have to return to the house after spending some hours. You will also notice that some people sometimes become very angry. There's a kind of quarrel between the husband and wife, and either the husband leaves the house or the wife leaves the house. I mean, the mother leaves the house or the father leaves the house. So if the mother leaves the house, she goes to her, I mean, parental house, and after a few days, she waits whether the husband comes to take her or not. And on the other hand, the husband, if the husband leaves the house, there is nobody to call him. So that is the tragedy of the male people or the men. I'm making fun. Don't take it seriously. What I wanted to mean that Mr. Morel, he left the house, and he pretended that he was very angry. Not pretension, I think that is his character. Mrs. Morel feels sure that he will return that night, but Mrs. Morel knew that her husband would return. It was a kind of pretension. But she begins to get worried when he has not returned by dark, but he did not return even in the evening. However, she finds this bundle hidden behind the door of the coal shed and begins to laugh. But what Mrs. Morel discovers that the bundle which Mr. Morel prepared and pretended that he was going for good, that he would never return to the house, he secretly, kept that bundle in the coal shed. So Mrs. Morel, when she discovers that her husband did not carry that and he would return, so she started smiling herself. Morel sulkily returns later that evening, and his wife tells him to fetch his bundle before going to bed. So Morel finally returns, and Mrs. Morel makes a kind of joke telling her husband that the bundle you left in the coal shed, please bring that bundle and keep those dresses in the right position. Now, chapter 3, the casting off of Morel, the taking on William. Casting off of Morel means the husband is gradually going far away, not physically, I'm telling you, not only physically, mentally, psychologically. The detachment starts, already it has started. And Mrs. Morel getting cling to her son, William, the eldest son. Morel begins to fall ill. Despite all of his requests for medicine, uh, you know, his illness is attributed to the time he fell asleep on the ground when he went with Jerry to Nottingham. He falls seriously ill, and his wife has to nurse him. She gets some help from her neighbors, but not every day. Eventually, Morel grows better, but he has been spoiled during his illness, and at first wants more attention from his wife. So what happens? That Mr. Morel became ill, and when Mr. Morel became ill, Mrs. Morel, took care of her husband. Gradually, he improved, and after the disease, he lost his health, and he was expecting more attention and sympathy from his wife. However, she has begun to cast him off and to turn completely to her children to find a sense of meaning in her life. This is very important, but it's not going to happen. He was physically ill, he was attended by his wife, but the kind of mental intimacy he was expecting from his wife, that intimacy is no more possible. And he has probably destroyed the possibility of that intimacy by leading a reckless life, by ignoring his wife. by not allowing their relationship to flourish in an expected and desired way. So Mrs. Morel, psychologically, and she becomes more detached from her husband, and now she is completely dependent and attached to her children for the meaning of her life. She wants to find meaning in her life. She did not find any meaning in her conjugal life. Meaning in life is very important. Whether if there is no meaning in life, then there is no meaning of existence as well. We read the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. We read The Wasteland, and we know that the meaning of life is very important. And in the modern society, we noticed that they don't, or they have hardly any meaning in their life. And this meaninglessness of existence is basically the crisis of modern man. This meaninglessness of existence was basically the crisis of, Prufrock as well. So this characteristic we also find over here, that man's desperate attempt, human beings' desperate attempt to find meaning in life. Now, in this connection, if I also ask you that what is the meaning of your life? Can this be the meaning of a person's life, that you are having two buildings in a city, two flats in the capital, in Dhaka city, or in Rajshahi city, or in the major divisions or cities in the country, or having two or three private cars, or having a lavish life? Can it give you a meaning of life, or does it give you a meaning of life? Having children, does it give you a meaning of life? So meaning of life is a great issue. It's a great issue. So it basically depends that how what you understand by meaning. So are you doing justice to your wish or will, or your desires, your aspirations? Are you doing justice to yourself? And if you do justice to yourself, then you are having the meaning of your existence. So Mrs. Morel wants to do justice to her existence, and that is why she is getting detached from her husband and becoming more attached towards the children. Dear students, I am gradually becoming, not I am, my speech, my lecture is going to be complex gradually. I told you that as we will progress in this novel, our understanding will be unfolded. The mystery of the novel will be unfolded gradually. So that's what I have already started. During the period of peace following Morel's illness, another baby is conceived. So Mrs. Morel is very busy in giving birth to children. She has already three, and now when Mr. Morel was ill, by this time, Mrs. Morel conceives another baby. And this child, Arthur, is born when Paul is 17 months old. So the next, already we have three, William, Annie, and Paul. So this is going to be the fourth child, and whose name is Arthur. And when he was born, Paul was only 17 months old. Arthur is very fond of his father, and this makes Mrs. Morel happy. And after birth, Arthur happened to be, or seemed to be, very, you know, close and very fond of its father. Mrs. Morel became to some extent happy because, like her, the other three children, I mean William, Annie, and Paul, they also don't like their father. They also disliked their father. So Mrs. Morel had a kind of sympathy for her husband because the children don't like her. So when Arthur showed a kind of fondness towards his father, so Mrs. Morel became happy that, well, at least he will have one son. Now, meanwhile, time is passing. William is growing bigger, and Paul begins to have fits of depression in which he cries for no reason. So William, the eldest son, he is growing up, and Paul, the third child, he was suffering from a kind of depression, and he started crying very frequently without any reason. One day, one of the other women of the neighborhood, Mrs. Anthony, confronts Mrs. Morel because William has ripped her son Alfred's collar. Mrs. Morel asks William about it. He gives her side of the story, and she reprimands him. So there is a complaint about William, that William has ripped the collar of his friend. And when the mother listens to the complaint, I mean Mrs. Morel, She scolds William. However, Mrs. Anthony also tells Morel about the incident, and he becomes home very angry with William. So that lady whose son's collar was, ripped by William, that lady had complained to Mrs. Morel and Mr. Morel as well. So Mrs. Morel just scolded her son, but when Mr. Morel came to know this, he became very angry, and he behaved in a rude manner with William. This provokes yet another battle between Mr. and Mrs. Morel, as it is only her intervention that prevents from beating William. And the father wanted to beat William. He was very aggressive. But the mother didn't want to allow her husband to beat the child. Now, this is again very delicate psychological issue. Mother, I don't know why it happens. I don't know, but this happens. Just compare my analysis with you. I may be wrong. I may be wrong, but just listen to me and just compare what I am saying. The mother basically wants that if there is any punishment for the children, it is her area. It is her area. She will give punishment. She will scold the children. It's not the area of the father. And if the father gives punishment to the children, the mother becomes angry and the mother confronts always. But when the mother scolds the children, when the mother beats the children, you will hardly notice that the father comes to intervene. Hardly the father comes. But when the father, gives the punishment, the mother frequently comes to intervene. So why does it happen? Probably unknowingly the mother thinks that giving punishment to the children is the sole property of the mother because she has given birth to the children. And if it is a male boy, then the mother thinks that the father should not come at all. And the mother never allows or tries to never allow the father to come close to the male child. So these are very complex psychological issues we are going to deal with, we are going to handle. You know, Mrs. Morel joins the Women's Guild, a club of women attached to a cooperative wholesale society who meet and discuss social questions. So we also see that Mrs. Morel gets involved in a club which discusses social issues as well. When William is 13, she gets him a job at the cooperative office. So when William is only 13 years old, she finds a job for William in that cooperative office. This provokes another argument with her husband. And when she gets William involved in that office, the husband becomes angry. Who would have preferred his son to become a miner like himself? Because the father wanted that his son, William, will be a miner like him. But the mother didn't want that. The mother rather wanted her son to work in an office. And the father wanted his son to work in the mine. So that there is again a psychological battle between the husband and the wife. William does well in his job, but William is doing well in the office as it does well in everything. And William basically does well. He is a good boy, almost everything. He wins the running race. He is a good runner and he wins in the race and brings his mother home the prize, an inkstand shaped like an anvil. He brings an inkstand, ink, liquid, stand, ink is liquid. At that time it was liquid, and right now you will have also liquid ink. And that was a kind of ink pot or inkstand which he won, winning race. However, William clashes with his mother when he begins to dance. Mrs. Morel turns away girls who come to call, much to William's dismay. And Mrs. Morel doesn't want that his son will dance with girls, and she would frequently, let those girls go away. And Mrs. Morel didn't like his son to mix with girls. At 19, William gets a new job in Nottingham and also begins to study very hard. So when William became 19 years old, he got a new job in Nottingham. Then he is offered a job in London at £120 a year. And then he got another job in London, and the salary was £120 a year. At that time, it was a good salary. and ecstatic. He was very happy, failing to see his mother's dismay at his departure. And the mother also became very unhappy when William left home. William and his mother have one final shared moment as they burn his love letters, and then he goes to London to start his new life. Now, William and his mother have one final shared moment as they burn his love letters. Now, these burning love letters, and I mean this final sharing between the mother and the son, the moment of sharing and burning of the love letters. After burning the love letters, William goes to start his new life in London, and this is the sentence with which I will start my new class next time. And remember, this is the last sentence of this chapter with which I will start my next class with you. So for today, thank you very much. Stay safe.